accomplish? So are we doing the right things? And who are the people I need on my team to do this? Who needs to understand this mission to make it happen? Second, and this, by the way, is my second favorite story from the history of innovation and technology. I'll share my favorite story later on. Yeah.
I would that are we doing things right? So I think most of the time goes in that instead of actually doing things. So
Most of the time, what?
yeah, I mean when we are more worried about are we doing things right and more worried about the mission that we are focused on. Instead, the better path I guess would be to live with the uncertainty. Yeah, there is always a lot of uncertainty with you, so that you're always open to things and. Or else if you're going to spend a lot of time on are we doing things right, I think most of life would go in getting the things right.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I think I see what you're saying. What I'm not saying is make sure you're always making sure that everything's perfect.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that. I'm glad you brought this up. I'm definitely not saying. In fact, if you want to become an entrepreneur like Veen Pula in the back, who's one of our great entrepreneurs, say hi Veen, founder of Watson, the reason I'm here, in fact, if you want everything to be perfect always, then you will never succeed as an entrepreneur. Now, someone will say, well, Steve Jobs wanted everything perfect always, but Steve Jobs also was able to do that and manage in a context of high uncertainty. And if you read his biography, you'll find that he evolved over time. The business he created the first time with Apple was very different than the business he created the second time when he came back. But he still maintained this perfectionist core to him. The other thing I'll point out about Steve Jobs is that he was Steve Jobs. So my first advice to you is if you're aspiring to be Steve Jobs, just give up now, okay? Stop trying to aspire to be Steve Jobs. Be who you are. There's going to be something special in that. Find that. Don't try and be the only person in history who's ever been Steve Jobs. So what I'm not saying is try and make sure everything is perfect. What I am saying is make sure that we're doing the right things. Not doing them perfectly, but doing the right things to get to the right objective. Does that make sense? So the second thing is write down your questions. So I mentioned before, a lot of times people think they know what they're trying to do, or others think they know what the company's trying to do. And many times they don't really know. And cognitive science has proven that people only see the things for which they're looking. Let me say that again. This is a powerful dynamic. You can look this up later and you'll find a lot of fun videos about it as well. People only see the things for which they're looking. This is an evolutionary adaptation because we're always being hit by more data points than we could ever process. In fact, our brains would never be able to generate or there would be so much energy required by our brain to process every data point hitting us that we wouldn't be able to survive. So we've evolved in order to only select out the data points that might confer a competitive advantage. So this means we only see the things for which we're looking. My favorite example of this is this fellow, Dr. Fleming. Now, many of you are probably familiar with the fun story about how Dr. Fleming discovered penicillin and became famous and saved the world. And about 25% or so of us would not be in the room today had it not been for Fleming's discovery. So this was a change the world sort of thing. But what most people don't know is that literally dozens of medical researchers had seen exactly the same thing happen for decades. So what happened was Fleming was a messy clinician. He was doing research on bacteria. And he went in his lab one day. He had petri dishes, the glass things with the yucky stuff in it. He walked in his his lab, and there was some stuff in the petri dish that killed the bacteria. And he looked at it and said, killed the bacteria. Didn't kill me. Wow. And the light bulb went off, and he discovered penicillin. Now, what most people think when they hear this story, I get it. Innovation is about serendipity. It's about that chance event that no one knew was going to happen, and it happens, and you discover something, and you become famous and make a lot of money. Unfortunately, that is the wrong insight from this story. In fact, it is a dangerous insight from this story. Because what most people don't know is that literally dozens of people, researchers, had seen exactly the same thing happen for decades. In fact, in the 1920s, there were two researchers who wrote an article to help their colleagues stop getting the stupid stuff in the petri dish that keeps killing the bacteria. And no one put two and two together. Now, why was Fleming the one who uniquely saw? Well, there were two reasons. One, he was a creative, visionary guy. We have to give him credit for that. He was maybe a little bit more visionary than most human beings, so congratulations. But there was something else which we can learn a lot from, and that was Fleming served in World War I. During that experience, he saw thousands of people dying of infectious diseases. As a result of that, he made it his life's mission to understand bacteria. Not just to understand bacteria to extend the bounds of science, which is a noble thing to do, it's a wonderful thing to do, but to understand bacteria specifically in order to help protect human beings from it. Think about that. When he saw what dozens had seen before and missed, he was the one who uniquely saw, because he had that mission in mind. He had the question in his head. So at the Kin, we like to say, never leave serendipity to chance. The idea is we try and do things to bring people together in unexpected ways, to experiment in new things, to learn new things. And this will increase the likelihood that some chance event will occur that gives us a new path, a new advantage, a competitive advantage, etc. So the question I'd ask you is, what are the questions you're asking? And you can do this at any point in your life, especially if something's important. If something's bothering you, you're waking up at night, what should I do? Should I go to business school? Should I go to Watson? Should I become an entrepreneur? Screw it and screw school and I'm just going to do it myself. Should I take that job my dad keeps telling me I should take at the post office? What should I do? Well, get up and start writing. Write down the questions. Articulate them and then think about them, because you're much more likely to see the solutions. But I would extend this as well on a personal basis. What are the people whom you love asking? What are the questions that are bothering them? Because I'm going to say it's hard for you to help them if you don't know what they're looking for. And same thing for you. It's hard for them to help you if they don't know what you're looking for. So write down the questions. It will increase the likelihood that you'll find answers. Live in multiple worlds. This is research by a fellow named Ron Burt at the University of Chicago. And he studies how people come up with ideas, how they get them acted on. And he's had a few very interesting results. One is that people with 2 or more deep knowledge areas are better at coming up with good ideas. People with 2 or more deep knowledge areas are better at coming up with good ideas. Now, this makes some sense. Why do you think that would be? What might explain that? What?
Diversity in each sector or each domain itself.
Yeah. So they have diversity of knowledge. They can link them together. Yep, they can bring them together in new ways. Okay, this is good. But here, this is the interesting part. So he was studying people in companies and how they come up with new ideas. And so people with deep knowledge, not just a little bit, but real deep experience in marketing and finance, or human resources and engineering, doesn't matter, it's just 2 different areas, are better at coming up with good ideas. So that makes sense. But here's the interesting part. People who are deep knowledge in, say, marketing and Italian opera, or finance and cricket, are better at coming up with good ideas. It didn't matter. Yeah.
That means if you have a PhD, your risk of good ideas actually
Goes down. Yes, because you're so. That's right, actually.
Unfortunately, right?
Because we don't want to get into a problem with academia, because we can talk for hours about that. But you can become so focused, become an expert in one small, minute thing, then you miss the diversity of opportunity out there. And so the likelihood of you coming up with a really breakthrough idea, if you're very, very focused, is actually rather low, because you're so immersed in the dominant paradigms of whatever that small sliver of the universe is. So this is an interesting result. It's not just people with 2 or more deep business areas of knowledge or technology areas of knowledge. It's people with 2 or more deep knowledge areas in almost anything. Yeah.
Has it got something to do with the interaction with people around and understanding them and then aligning your goals towards?
Yeah.
Because you alone cannot achieve always. You need people, as you move across,
Yes.
you will need different category of people with different mindsets to
Yes.
help you move towards that direction.
You've jumped ahead, so you read ahead. I don't know where you got my. Very good, very good. That's right. So
It's about people, I guess.
it is about
Understand.
knowledge and being able, two things. It's about being able to connect things that were not connected before, which is the essence of innovation, by the way. Joseph Schumpeter, the great Austrian economist who invented the word entrepreneur the way we use it, it was used before, but he used the word for the first time the way we use it. Joseph Schumpeter referred to innovation as new combinations. New combinations of a variety of things. We can talk about that later if you want. But what's interesting is not only your ability to combine knowledge areas because you have multiple knowledges or languages in your head, but also, as you've just pointed out, your ability to empathize with other people who have different paradigms, knowledge areas in their head. It turns out that people, this is an even more interesting result from Ron, people with 2 or more deep knowledge areas are better at getting other people to invest in their ideas. This is really interesting, and that's the reason why you've just stated. People with 2 or more deep knowledge areas are better at getting other people to invest in their ideas, to raise money, or it could just be to raise friends. Hey, would you help me on the side for free just doing this stuff because I really need your help and I'm sorry I can't pay you because I don't have any money? Well, okay. They're better at getting people to do that sort of stuff for them. And that's one of the things entrepreneurs have to be good at. Especially in the early stage, you're going to have to finagle your friends into doing stuff for you for free because you haven't raised $1 million from a venture capitalist, right? And you probably still have people who won't return your calls because you keep asking for free stuff, right?
Mom and Dad.
Yeah, pardon?
Mom and
Dad, yeah. A venture capital friend of mine, one of my really good friends said, when I'm a venture capitalist, I want to know if their mom or dad's invested, because if they haven't, then I'm not going to invest. If their mom or dad won't even invest, then there's a problem. So in any case, this is really interesting, and what it suggests is, one thing to me it suggests is obviously you need to have a professional knowledge area of some sort if you're going to be in business. You got to know something about the business or about marketing or finance or something, right? But it also says that if there's something in your life that you've loved, that you're passionate and excited about, don't necessarily ignore it and leave it aside because you don't have time for it. Maybe remaining focused on that as well gives you some diversity of knowledge and thought and might actually make you more successful in the long run. And that's true about the people who work with you and for you. This is one of the reasons why a great company like Google allows people the time to explore other things, and 3M allows people time to explore other things, because they believe that it actually makes the company more successful in the long run. And it seems that there are some data that suggest that. So I'm going to skip a couple things because I want to give us more time for discussion. But I mentioned this before about uncertainty. So resolving uncertainty through a rational process. A lot of people believe that the highest risk in a new project or a new business is at the beginning. But that's not actually the case. Now let's set aside the risk of inaction, because sometimes there's a greater risk of not acting than a risk of acting. Like if you're in a big company and there's a new technology rising, you might decide, oh no, we're not going to do that, but maybe there's higher risk from not acting because it might destroy your business. But let's set that aside for a second. At the beginning of a new idea, the risk is not the highest because you haven't spent anything on it yet. The uncertainty is the highest. And so where risk comes in, the calculation is actually the uncertainty times the amount of money or time, personnel, et cetera, you've spent on it. That's actually the risk. And so the way a lot of people think about risk and uncertainty in innovation is actually the wrong way. And I'll give you one way to think about it that is the right way. And that is, do not manage the rate of failure. Manage the cost of failure. Let me say this again. Do not manage the rate of failure. Manage the cost of failure. So why do I say this? Well, because in most of our careers, or in school and then our first jobs, we're actually conditioned to think about the rate of failure, the likelihood something will succeed or fail. And if you're trying to do something new, if you're an entrepreneur or an innovator at a company, if you're trying to do something really new, the likelihood that you're wrong about it at the very beginning is actually rather high. The likelihood that it won't succeed is rather high at the beginning, right? So if you're worried about the likelihood it'll succeed or fail, the rate of failure, then you won't do any of those new things. You'll avoid them. And actually, for the most part, that's good for your career because you don't want to have your name on all these things that keep failing. So for normal business, that's a reasonable response. But if you want to be an entrepreneur or an innovator doing new things, you're going to run into high uncertainty all the time. So the way we need to think about it is managing the cost of failure, not the rate of failure. Now let me illustrate what I mean. Let's say I told you I have an investment opportunity with a 95% chance of failure. How many of you would be interested in maybe investing with me? Oh, hey, great, let's talk at the break. I got a lot of ideas. All right. Now, on the other hand, I got why most of you didn't raise your hand. But let's say I said to you I have an investment opportunity with a 95% chance of failure, but if we're right about it, it could be worth $1 billion to the company, and it'll only cost us $50,000 to find out. Now how many of you might consider making that investment? That's called expected value. And this is how we need to think about managing failure within innovation. Manage the cost of it, not the rate of it. And so that relates back to the first thing we talked about, which was resolving uncertainty through a rational process. Finding the uncertainties that are critical to resolve early, that don't cost much, and resolving those uncertainties. Make sense? So I'm going to tell one more story, do a few more wrap-up things, and then we'll jump into some Q&A, because I do want you to hear more about the Watson approach and the curriculum. It's pretty exciting. As a faculty member at Kellogg now for a dozen years, it's exciting to see a group take a brand new perspective. And of course, I'm biased because I'm in innovation and entrepreneurship, so of course I'm going to think this is great, but I want you to have some time to think about it. So last story. Seek wisdom in mistakes, things that don't go well. Now, none of us like when things don't go well, understandably. But when you're in an organization and somebody screws something up, something doesn't go well, what's the first thing people do?
Blame.
Blame? No, that's the second thing. Frustration, that happens all the time. So blame is second. What's before blame? Quit?
No, setting's right.
What?
Set it
Oh,
right.
fix it. Okay, well, hopefully. You're a good man. Try and fix it. Let's try and fix it. Okay. What?
Find the reason.
Let's find the reasons. Let's try and fix it. You guys read this in the textbook. That's good. But in a real organization, the first thing that people usually do, hide it. Because if nobody knows it's there, then maybe it didn't happen, right? Right. Now the problem with that is, if something doesn't go as you plan, perhaps there's a problem with the way you see the universe. Perhaps there's a problem with your hypotheses about the world. And when you're an entrepreneur, at the beginning, you just have hypotheses. I mean, you believed that your thing was going to work, but you didn't really know for sure until it was working, right?
And there are 100 people who tell you it's not going to work.
And then 100 and who knows how many people are going to tell you it's not going to work. That's when you know you're onto something, when a lot of people tell you it's not going to work. So these two people, Michelson and Morley, Michelson won a Nobel Prize. Morley died before he could receive his prize. They conducted perhaps the most famous failed experiments in history. They were trying to prove the existence of something called the luminiferous ether. This was the dominant hypothesis of physics at the time that explained the following phenomenon. Now we know this was wrong, but everybody agreed this was the right path. And for good reason. It explained the following phenomenon. Sound cannot travel because there's nothing within the vacuum for the sound to travel through. However, light can travel through a vacuum. So therefore, the hypothesis was, there must be something in the vacuum we cannot see. So Michelson and Morley did experiments to try and prove the existence of this hypothesized luminiferous ether, and they failed. So they couldn't figure out why. They changed the equipment and the calibration. They did the experiment again, and it failed again. They published their results. Other people copied the experiment to try and verify. Their experiments failed. No one could figure out what was going wrong until this fellow at the Swiss Patent Office read the research and said, perhaps there is no problem with the experiment. Perhaps there's a problem with the way we see the universe. And this was one of the factors that led to the theory of relativity. Because Einstein recognized that the experiments didn't fail. The data that were coming from the universe were right. We just couldn't see them. We couldn't process them because our paradigm was so strong. And when he stood back as objectively as one can be and reviewed the results, It helped him arrive at the theory of relativity. So my question, my recommendation to you as you go through your life, when something doesn't go well, it's not good enough to just be frustrated. Be a little bit frustrated for a minute, but stand back and ask, what can I learn from that? What happened? Why did it happen? And in an organization as a leader, being upfront about it without blaming people, without firing people immediately, because if you do that, then no one will ever confront a problem ever again. No one will ever come into your office to talk about uncertainty. And if you want to be innovating and doing new things, you're going to have conversations about uncertainties. Anytime I see companies where people won't go in to talk to the boss until they've got all the answers, until it's absolutely perfect, is a company that's not going to be good at innovating. Because no one can have an open conversation about uncertainty, and everything in innovation, in the early stage especially, is about dealing with uncertainty. So above all else, know thyself. Obviously, I'm not the first person to have said this. I'm sure there are a few Indian mystics who have said this as well. I think in our side of the earth, it was Socrates, Plato, all those people. Then there's Lao Tzu over in China. So lots of people have said this. But honestly, I believe this is the most important thing we're here to do, to try and understand why we're here and what we're about. And the data are rather clear. People tend to be more the strategy person or more the execution person. They tend to be more about, some people tend to be more about seeing the future, understanding what might be possible, creating a new concept, resolving uncertainty through a rational process, dealing with the anxiety of not knowing for sure, but going out against the odds and making it happen. And other people are great at executing the plan. Other people are great at making sure that the ball bearing is perfect off the manufacturing line every time. And by the way, we need both. Great companies in the long run must have both. You need the visionaries to see the future and build a portfolio of options and resolve uncertainty, and you need the exceptional execution people who go out and hit their numbers every time. And they tend to be different people. So a big question for you is, which one are you more of? And one thing I hope you learn over the next few years, if you come to Watson, you'll definitely have an opportunity to explore this challenge. Are you more the strategy, future vision person, or are you more the execution person? And we need both. So, of what are you aware? What are the questions you're asking? Clearly, one of the questions is, what's my next step in my career? Or you wouldn't be here, unless you, like this gentleman, just didn't have anything else going on a Saturday night. That's possible. But otherwise, why am I here and which direction am I going? Write down the problems you're trying to solve and think about them, because you'll be much more likely to find solutions. Diversify and prototype. Change your context in life sometimes. As I mentioned at the beginning, once you get on a path, life will just suck you along. But one of the saddest things I see in my life, and it's incredibly sad, is when somebody says to me, well, I've been in this business for 20 years. I hate it, but it's the only thing I know how to do. So I'm just going to keep doing it until I retire. That's not a way to live your life. Love it, change it, or leave it. And that's your responsibility and no one else's. So part of dealing with this issue is because you can never know today what exactly your life's going to be like in 10 years or 20 years. Part of dealing with this issue personally is building a portfolio of options on the future. That's not just about business, it's also about living. How do you find optionality in your life? Well, one way is occasionally to step back and do something new. For instance, I tell my friends who work for companies because they don't have a lot of time, there's always more work to do than time in the day. In fact, work is like a gas. It expands to fill the available space. So I say, once a year, go to a conference that has nothing directly to do with your business or your function. Pick something that looks kind of weird and interesting and go to it. Now I tell you, those people in computational fluid dynamics don't get a lot of visitors. But they're really excited when some new person shows up. And when you go to that CFD conference, in a few years, you might be the only person at your company that has a friend who's a CFD expert. That's a notion of building optionality because you built a broader network, a more diverse network. And that's one of the benefits of going to a business school like Watson, because you get to meet a lot of different people in an intensive setting for 1 or 2 years. That diversifies your access to knowledge and partners to make you better as a person and as an entrepreneur. Ultimately, it's about finding meaning. And I know that all of you are seeking that, otherwise you wouldn't have spent your Saturday night here. Now, this is a long discussion we don't have time for right now, but I'll give you one clue. And I'm quite serious about this. All of us have this. You remember when you were 6 years old and you stole a donut at a family party or something? You weren't supposed to have it, and you knew it was wrong, but you stole it. Maybe no one noticed, and so you thought, well, that worked out. I got my donut. And as we get older and older, we get better and better at rationalizing why we do things. Even if we intrinsically might know it's not the right thing, it's not the right path. And when you did that, when you stole that donut, even though it was nice to have the donut, you knew it was wrong, and you felt it here. You actually physically felt that what you were doing was wrong. You remember that. Now the good news is, when you're doing the right thing, you also feel it. You also feel it in here, that it's the right thing. And I don't just mean when things are going well and your business is growing and everybody's, you're on the cover of the magazine. I mean when you're doing the right thing against all the odds. When you're doing the right thing and things aren't going well, and people are against you, and those 100 people have said, that's a stupid idea, but you feel it here and you know it's the right thing. You can follow that. And it's not just emotion or fear or craziness that allows us to do that. And you have to work at it to recognize the difference between fear and intuition. But when you can hone your ability to connect with that, that will help be a guidepost for finding the meaning that I'm talking about. Ultimately, we all have a common objective. We have to do this together. We won't do it as a country, as an individual, as a single company. We'll only do it as a world community. And that is to prove this fellow, Thomas Robert Malthus, wrong again. This is actually the other reason I got into innovation. One was that book in 4th grade that I mentioned at the beginning. The other was becoming fascinated by this challenge. In 1798, Thomas Robert Malthus, who was the world's first demographer, Thomas Robert Malthus published a book called On Population. You might have heard about this in various places, Malthusian economics. It pops up from time to time. And in this work, he showed that population growth increases geometrically, and food production increases arithmetically. And so therefore, at some point in the midst of the 19th century, society will collapse under the weight of its own demands in mass starvation, conflagration, and warfare. Does this sound similar to where we are today? There were only 2 reasons Malthus was wrong. One was the end of the Little Ice Age. He could have known nothing about that, but there was a small ice age. It ended and it bumped up food production worldwide, but not nearly enough to get us to 7.3 billion people on the planet today, and not nearly enough to get us to 9 or 10 billion in many of our lifetimes. The only other reason Malthus was wrong was innovation. Even innovation driven largely, though not exclusively, by for-profit companies trying to do more with less. That is the dynamic of the marketplace in the long run. The market, by the way, is not perfect, but it is one of the most powerful mechanisms humanity has ever stumbled across, and it drives us to do more with less. And for-profit companies stay in business because they satisfy the needs and wants of customers, of consumers, of other businesses, of governments. Nonprofits, again, are just businesses with a different tax status. They have to innovate in order to remain relevant, in order to gain donations from their donors, or in order to provide products and services for which they get paid. So this competitive dynamic. Governments, in a different way, need to innovate in order to support their citizenry in better ways, hopefully creating a context within which this competitive dynamic can occur. It is only because of innovation and entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurs that manifest the innovations in the world, could be corporate entrepreneurs, could be government entrepreneurs, could be independent entrepreneurs. It is only because of this dynamic we have any hope of having a world 9 billion people can live in the future. Thanks a lot for your time and attention. I think we have time for some questions.
Absolutely. Lots of
Great.
questions. So, take your I now open the floor for questions. So, any questions to Dr. Rob Walcott? Let me start here.
Hi, this is Prashant. I just want to know about at the earliest, while we are creating our own ventures. So how can you minimize the risk at the earliest? And there are a lot of options available, but how can we choose the best options which are available? How can we sort it out?
Short what out?
Yeah, the options which are available while taking into consideration into while we create a new venture.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Yeah.
How do we decrease the risk at the
Yeah.
beginning of a venture?
And how do we choose the options? Means how do we choose the best option which are available?
Okay. So two things. I already talked about resolving uncertainty through a rational process, about identifying the different kinds of uncertainty. So one thing you can do is try and write out with you and your partners every uncertainty you can think of in those four categories: market, product or technology, organization, and financial. And then after you do that, think about what are actions I can take to resolve the uncertainties. And then how much would those actions cost me? How long would they take, etc. Find the ones that are the highest value to resolve and the lowest cost, and do those first. And then the ones that are really important to resolve but they're going to be expensive, you can't just ignore those, because you could end up working on it for a year and then later on find out you're wrong and it blows everything up. So what you need to do with those is do what scientists do. Take that really big challenge and break it into smaller pieces, and learn a little bit about it at the beginning to resolve a little bit of that uncertainty as you go along. And then meanwhile, as you get more resources, maybe investment capital, maybe you're selling product and you've got revenue, then resolve more and more of those uncertainties. But your second question was more about the selection of options, right? How do you find the right options? Well, ultimately, you can't just decide ex ante in advance which one is going to be the one that's successful. If there were a formula I could give you for selecting the one option that is the best one, then none of us would be here right now. We'd all be out buying options, and we'd all be billionaires. And if you think about it, that probably wouldn't work out. So that's the reason why you create optionality, because you don't know exactly which one is going to succeed. Now that honestly is a big challenge for an independent entrepreneur, because for a certain period of time as an independent entrepreneur, you've got to really commit to one general course of action. And you're putting a lot of eggs in one basket, as we say in the United States, and that's dangerous. But look, risk correlates with something. You remember what risk correlates with? Remember from finance class? Return. Risk correlates with return. So you're going to have to take some real risks. But even as an independent entrepreneur going off in that one direction, you can still create some optionality around that direction by making various experiments, looking in various paths, right?
So it's just like hidden trial, means every option should you have to take into consideration what are available at that point of time.
Yeah, well, you can't take into consideration information not available at that point of time, of course. That's part of the challenge. We're always driving forward, looking through the rearview mirror. Imagine trying to drive your car like that. But that's how we live life, especially on a street in India. So that's why we need a portfolio of options, and you're going to have to figure out how much you can take on. Every option comes at a cost. I'll just use my own life as an example, and not that I'm a good example, but I am an example of optionality. I've got my work at Kellogg. Here I am working with Watson, because I think it's fun and exciting, and I believe in the vision, and I'm involved a little bit with Watson, and I've got Clario Partners, my consultancy. We've got 15 people. I've got 3 other equity partners, and it's great. So I've got a number of projects, but that optionality comes at a cost, because I have to commit some time to Watson. I have to commit some time to Kellogg and some time to Clario, and so that also makes me less focused. So one might ask, well, what if I just focused on the business? Or what if I just focused on being a professor? That's a good question. Maybe I'd actually be successful. Who knows? I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? What else? Yeah.
See, if you focus on entrepreneurship, you will be good at one particular, solving particular problem. But you will be missing so many other things. If your objective is to, broaden yourself, or to learn first and then jump in, it should be the other way.
What do you mean?
Getting into an MBA gives you the tools required to become a successful entrepreneur, or the
You don't need an MBA if you're an entrepreneur.
right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
He's asking.
Do you need an MBA
So
to become
the
an
answer to
entrepreneur?
the question is absolutely not. So if the question is, do you need an entrepreneur to be, do you need an MBA to be an entrepreneur? The answer is obvious, no. All you have to do is come up with examples of people who don't have MBAs, or for that matter, undergraduate degrees. But it's horrible logic, as is going on with some people in the world right now, to say, well, look, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they dropped out of, Michael Dell, they all dropped out of school. Therefore, I'll just drop out of school and I'll be Michael Dell. And we all laugh at that because there's a beautiful fallacy in that logic, right? So what an MBA does, if it's focused around innovation and entrepreneurship, it gives you a space to consider which paths you might want to take. It gives you a space to explore whether entrepreneurship is right for you. And I'll tell you, even if you go through it and you decide, you know what, I thought about this hard, I tried it out, and being an independent entrepreneur is really scary. And this is tough. This is a lot harder than I thought. It's not as glamorous as I thought it was. Well, guess what? Now you have a bunch of skills and capabilities that you can use in your corporation. If you go work for a corporation, you've got a lot of very applicable skills you can use in that context. But it gave you an opportunity to stand back and experiment in a safe place where you're not mortgaging your house, you're not have your family on the line, you're studying, you're learning, you're building a network, you're building an ecosystem. Every entrepreneur needs to be good at building an ecosystem of partners and people who support them, people who will return their calls, people who identify them as someone serious, because they're coming to them, they're talking about crazy ideas a lot. So it gives you the opportunity to build that network, to build an ecosystem, to build a set of skills, and also the time, the luxury of being able to stand back and think about what's the right path for me, and to experiment with some paths. Does that make sense? But at the end of the day, too, you're an entrepreneur if you're an entrepreneur. That's the only requirement. The only requirement to being an entrepreneur is that you start a business. Now, that doesn't mean you're necessarily successful or not, but an entrepreneur is somebody who starts a business, right? Bean, is that right? An entrepreneur starts a business. But you can start a business on your own. You can start a business after spending a little bit of time to learn what others have learned and building the ecosystem and doing some experimentation at low cost. Make sense? Yeah.
With respect to you running a business and also being a VC and a professor, I have.
Well, I'm not a VC.
Okay.
My partners and I make angel investments. So these are small investments in a variety of different things,
All
and we're
right.
not actively managing them or anything like that.
But in the perspective of an investor, I have two questions. One is, in the current world that's largely governed by greed, the corporate colonialism, corporations really want to make more money than, they satisfy more than what is needed.
Okay.
Or they push through ideas that you don't really want to use.
Okay.
And how do you maintain a business? What motivates you to maintain a business that's right, ethically proper? That's one thing.
Ah, okay.
And the second thing is, if someone comes up with a brilliant idea, and if you are someone who's going to fund that, what are the two good things on the idea front that you look for, and two good things on the personality front you would look for?
Wow, you've just asked 3 questions.
Sorry. I'll repeat that if you want.
That may be.
Yeah.
So the first one was about, we'll do the first one.
What
I forget-
motivates you to do
Right.
the right kind of business? And
Okay.
see, you're going to be concerned with your competition. They're going to be innovative. They're going to put more
So I'm
money.
going to give you a quick answer to that. First of all, what hopefully motivates people to do the right thing is to do the right thing.
Right.
But this corporate social responsibility, I don't like that name much because it pigeonholes it into some sort of public relations thing where you do stuff just to look good and then business happens over here. But there actually is research that is more and more suggesting that companies that do the right things actually are more successful in the long run. There's a book called Firms of Endearment, like Terms of Endearment, but Firms of Endearment by Raj Sisodia and a couple other people, part of the conscious capitalism movement. Some of the conscious capitalism stuff, if you look into it, it's very interesting. There's some good stuff there, but some of it also gets a little bit, flighty. But there are more and more situations where it turns out doing the right thing is the right business decision as well. So a great example of this that has nothing to do with consumer packaged goods, because you could say, well, of course, doing the right thing would be good for Nike. Because if they do the wrong thing, then consumers find out about it and they don't buy their products and all this. But we're finding this in industrial spaces as well, like mining, for instance. So if you do the wrong thing long enough, eventually a country kicks you out. They nationalize your mine. Like you saw in South Africa, the miners all going on strike. And here's an interesting manifestation of this. In the past 2 years, of the top 20 mining companies in the world, 12 of them have lost their CEOs in the last 2 years because the CEOs were either fired or retired. And the ones who retired with a $10 billion write-down. So you can guess what kind of retirement that was. They were basically being fired. The only one of the 12 that got moved up is a guy named Mark Kudafani, who's a Kenian. He's part of the kin. He was CEO of Anglo Gold Ashanti, the South African mining company. And he's been outspoken about the fact that the industry needs to change the way it's operating, not just because it's the right thing to do,